John barely managed to push the burning wood near scattered clothes, and a small box carefully wrapped his wounds with strips of cloth. A red light shot upward with a loud cry. Hazel by the arm, while another checked. Hazel whispered softly. With a gentle, they drew closer, holding each other to share, carrying them into the beginning of a new journey. Hazel, a beautiful American girl, was sitting in an airplane with her husband, John. Both of them were traveling to a new country. Through the airplane window, snow-covered mountains could be seen. Hazel smiled and held John's hand. Suddenly, the plane began to shake. The sound of engine failure echoed. Passengers started screaming, and smoke filled the cabin. Announcements were made. The plane is on fire. Hazel's heart raced. Fear filled her eyes. John wrapped her in his arms and said, "Hazel, we have to stay strong." The pilot announced that the plane was being diverted toward the mountains for an emergency landing. John looked into Hazel's eyes and said, "We have to jump now, or it will all be over." Holding each other's hands tightly, they leapt out of the window. With the roar of the wind around them, their parachutes opened, and they crashed down onto the snow-covered mountains. The impact injured them badly, but they were alive. Hazel and John had crashed hard onto the snow. Their hands and legs were wounded, and misty breaths escaped their lips into the freezing air. Hazel, gasping for breath, said, "John, we survived. But here, how are we going to stay alive?" Wiping the blood from his shoulder, John replied, "As long as we're together, we can face anything. First, we need shelter, or the cold will kill us." Stumbling and staggering, they began walking down the snowy slope. After some distance, they spotted a broken piece of the airplane. Rushing toward it, they found among the wreckage a few bags, a flashlight, and a small tent. John immediately tried to set up the tent. Hazel adjusted her clothes and began searching for dry wood on the snow. With great effort, they managed to put together a small camp. But before night could fall, another danger crept closer. From the bushes came the sound of heavy breathing. Both of them froze and turned, only to see a huge snow wolf emerging, its eyes gleaming with hunger and savagery. Hazel clutched John's hand in fear and whispered, "It's going to kill us." John grabbed a piece of wood and shouted fiercely, "Hazel!" The wolf began circling them slowly, its growls echoing through the icy night, sounding even more terrifying. Hazel's lips trembled as she stepped back and whispered. John quickly used the flashlight to spark a flame and lit the piece of wood he was holding. As soon as the fire flared up, the wolf hesitated for a moment, but then growled again and leapt forward. John swung the burning wood fiercely and shouted. The wolf lunged at him, and the two crashed onto the ground. John barely managed to push the burning wood near its jaws. The heat of the flame forced the wolf to recoil, letting out a furious howl. Hazel, gathering her courage, grabbed a stone lying nearby and hurled it with all her strength. The rock struck its side. The wolf snarled in pain and staggered back. After a few tense moments of struggle, it finally retreated into the snowy forest. Hazel rushed to John, tears filling her eyes as she saw his wounds. With a faint smile, John cupped her face gently and said. The two embraced tightly. Back inside the tent, Hazel carefully wrapped his wounds with strips of cloth. Outside, the snowfall grew heavier and the wind howled through the mountains. But within their hearts, the warmth of love for each other burned stronger than the storm. Inside the tent, the icy wind tried to seep in from every direction. Hazel was shivering, and John held her tightly in his arms to keep her warm. In the darkness of the night, only the faint glow of the flashlight remained. When the snow eased by morning, Hazel and John checked their bags. Inside, there were only a few biscuits, a small bottle of water, and a packet of dried fruits. Hazel sighed with worry and said, "This won't last us long. What are we going to do, John?" John looked up at the sky and replied, "We have to find a way to call for help. Maybe we'll find more supplies near the wreckage of the plane." They set out toward the debris buried in snow. The path was difficult. Their legs sank deep into the snow with every step, but they kept going. Alongside their footprints, they noticed spots of blood. Perhaps the same wolf was still lurking nearby. When they reached the wreckage, they found broken seats, scattered clothes, and a small box. As John opened it, his eyes lit up. It contained a flare gun. With excitement, he said, "Hazel, this is our hope. If we fire it, some rescue team might see us." For the first time, a spark of light returned to Hazel's face. But with worry in her voice, she said, "John, if the snowstorm doesn't clear, no one will see it. We have to wait for the right time." They looked into each other's eyes, and despite the hunger and exhaustion, a new hope stirred within them. But before night fell, they knew they had to set up their tent again, because on the mountain the night was always the most dangerous. As evening fell, the icy winds grew fiercer. Dark clouds covered the sky, and the snow began to fall heavily. Hazel, trembling, took shelter inside the tent while John tried to gather wood and start a small fire. But in the relentless snowfall, the flames kept dying out again and again. At last, John gave up and returned inside the tent. Their clothes were soaked from the wet snow. Shivering, Hazel whispered. John held her hands tightly in his and replied. They drew closer, holding each other to share whatever warmth they could. Hazel's tears rolled down onto John's shoulder as she whispered softly. John kissed her hair gently and answered. Amid the roar of the snowstorm, inside the fragile tent, they clung to one another. The snowstorm of the night had nearly broken them, but the comfort of each other had kept them alive. John stepped outside and looked up at the sky. The clouds had grown lighter, and faint beams of sunlight peeked through. He rushed back inside and said with urgency. Hazel held her wounded hands and whispered. John raised the flare gun toward the sky, took a deep breath, and pulled the trigger. A red light shot upward with a loud crack, spreading across the blue sky. Tears welled in Hazel's eyes, fear and hope battling within her. Together, they looked up and prayed. But hours passed, and there was no response. Snow began to fall again. Exhausted, Hazel rested her head on John's shoulder and murmured. John stroked her hair gently and said, as night began to creep in, they tried once again to start a fire. But suddenly, from far away, the thundering sound of helicopter blades echoed through the mountains. Hazel's eyes widened in disbelief as she gasped. The sound of helicopter blades grew closer and closer. Overwhelmed with joy, Hazel rushed outside and began waving her arms. John quickly fired the second flare. A burst of red light lit up the snowy sky, and the helicopter immediately turned in their direction. Within moments, members of the rescue team descended on ropes. One of them grabbed Hazel by the arm, while another checked John's injuries before pulling them both up to safety. Tears of relief streamed down Hazel's face as she clung tightly to John's hand. Inside the helicopter, they looked at each other. It was an unbelievable moment. Hazel whispered softly. With a gentle smile, John kissed her lips and replied. The rescue team wrapped them in blankets and handed them warm tea. Outside, the snow-covered mountains slowly drifted into the distance. From the shadow of death, they were now being carried toward a new life. Hazel gazed out the window one last time at the mountains, then rested her head on John's shoulder. The helicopter slowly rose toward the horizon, carrying them into the beginning of a new journey.